Okay, right. Order, order. Good morning. It's on behalf of the committee. Can I thank you, Mr. Verhofstadt, for appearing before the committee this morning. Guy Verhofstadt MEP is the Brexit coordinator and chair of the Brexit steering group in the European Parliament, and we've appreciated meeting you on our two previous visits to Brussels, and we're very grateful to you for coming to appear before the committee to give formal evidence today. As ever, lots of members of the committee have questions that they would like to put. Therefore, we have a lot of ground to cover. If you could keep your answers as succinct as possible, that will help us to bring everybody in. But I wanted to begin just by asking you, I mean, bluntly, how you think the process is going so far, and what is it about what has happened or hasn't happened that has surprised you, given we're now in June 2018?
Well, I'm not surprised by what is happening. I think this is a negotiation that is difficult, but is certainly a negotiation that covers so many fields that it is normal that it will take some time, and that we encounter some difficulties. Don't forget that what we are trying to do is a country who has decided to leave the European Union after nearly 40 years of relationship with the Union. And so a number of policies, relations have been established in these 40 years, and to undo that and to find the new relationship for the future, I think it's very normal that it takes time. And so where we are for the moment, well, as you have seen yesterday, there have been a common statement by the two negotiators that have been published, in which they announced that on 7 articles of the withdrawal agreement, they have now found an agreement. You have that list on Euratom, for example, on intellectual property, on the good place on the markets, on these 7 outstanding issues. So that means that more or less on 80%, I should say, of the withdrawal agreement, there is a consensus now. But we have to recognize that what is still not agreed, there is no agreement on 2 key issues. That is on Northern Ireland, and secondly on the governance. And the governance of the whole withdrawal agreement is naturally a key issue. It's not a minor issue. And on the other hand, and then I conclude, Mr. Ben, that is, we are naturally still in attendance of a global position by the UK government on the future relationship. And if I understand it well, normally in the coming weeks, the British government has the intention to publish a white paper. And I hope that by doing that, their white paper on the future relationship, I hope that they will be inspired by the resolution the European Parliament has already published, voted on, a few months ago in March of this year. And I hope that in this white paper that they're going to publish, they will be inspired by the proposals that we have done 3 months ago.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Can I pick up on one of those issues, which is Northern Ireland and how we maintain an open border? We seem to be stuck at the moment because the European Union's view is that the backstop proposal would apply to Northern Ireland only, and therefore the inevitable consequence of that would be, in effect, a border in the Irish Sea. As you will be well aware, that is unacceptable to Northern Ireland, it's unacceptable to the United Kingdom, it's unacceptable to this committee. On the other hand, the United Kingdom's proposal was that the whole of the UK remains in the customs union, and the government has acknowledged it will need to say something about regulation and the single market. And we've seen the response that there has been from Michel Barnier. Now, those are two positions which, at the moment, it's very hard to see how they can possibly be reconciled. How would you see the way forward?
If I can answer this question, I should be, I don't know, rewarded by everybody, by both sides.
Well, give it a go.
That's, no, the backstop is the backstop. Backstop is
yes.
backstop. Backstop is only a solution if there is no other solution. So the idea is not that the backstop is, we have found the solution to avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. No, the backstop is there if there is no other solution found in the framework of the future relationship between the EU and UK. We hope that with defining that future relationship between the EU and UK, it's a solution that is so good that it automatically disappears the problem that we have on the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. And it's only in the case that we don't find another solution on which we can agree that the backstop will be put in place. And that's also what Mrs. May has recognized in the letter that she has sent to President Tusk. So the backstop, so let's not make from the backstop, that's the solution for Ireland, Northern Ireland. No, it's a fallback position if there is no other good solution that
Indeed.
Can be found.
And we all understand that. I think the question is, what form is it going to take? Now, do you think it is unacceptable for the United Kingdom to say, well, the backstop will be the whole of the UK remains in the customs union as the backstop until another solution comes along, and I think the consequence of that would be that the whole of the UK is going to observe the rules of the internal market. Because that is one way of solving it. But do you, from your position, do you think that that is an unacceptable backstop from the European Parliament's point of view? And if so, why?
Yeah, but we prefer a solution that is really avoiding this border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic instead of using the backstop. So first of all, we hope that we can find a solution on that issue. Secondly, regulatory alignment will be a key in this, and it was not in the answer given by the British government to the European Union. And that was a key element that was missing, this regulatory alignment, because you cannot have only a customs arrangement. It needs to be accompanied by regulatory alignment, and that was missing. A backstop is something that is a permanent system that is there, that you don't use, but that is, while in the reaction by the UK government, the backstop was in fact proposed as a temporary system for 1 year. So I have never seen a backstop that is used for 1 year and then it disappears. No, a backstop is a fallback position that you have in your pocket, I should say, and you hope that you have never to use it. That's a backstop, in my opinion. So that was not in the proposal of the UK government, because I'm a little bit puzzled with the way how the UK government sees now that problem. If we follow their reaction on the backstop that is on the table, then it could be that there will be 3 customs arrangements in 2 years' time. The existing customs arrangement that we have now, and that will apply during the transition. Then the so-called backstop proposal by the UK, that in their proposal is limited to 1 year, to the end of 2021, and then a new system, whatever the new system will be, based on the future relationship between the EU and UK. That means concretely that there's going to be a lot of work to do by the customs authorities of Britain if we follow that path, because they're going to have 3 different regulations to apply in 2-3 years' time. So I think that we have to avoid that absolutely. And again, I'm looking now to the white paper, or expecting that in the white paper, when the UK government describes its idea of this future relationship, we will also find there some answers to the questions that you have put forward, Mr. President.
Let me just try one more time on this point. If it ended up that the way to give a backstop that everyone could rely on was that the whole of the United Kingdom remained in the customs union, applied the rules of the internal market for the period of time until another arrangement came along, and because that's the only way of avoiding the other way, which is it's only Northern Ireland, and there is a border, customs border, between two parts of the United Kingdom, which is not acceptable. If that was the only way of doing it, is that something that you think the European Parliament would be prepared to accept?
No, only if there is also regulatory alignment
But if it included regulatory alignment,
yeah, but that is not in what they have proposed.
I understand that.
I can answer you every hypothetical question that you want, but we have to work with what is on the table, and what was on the table was not acceptable for a number of reasons. First, the backstop was not a backstop, what they proposed, because it was only temporary. Secondly, there was no regulatory alignment, so it was lacking the two main elements to be acceptable. And that's the reason that there were critical remarks by Mr. Barnier and by myself when the UK government published their proposal.
Thank you very much indeed. Jonathan Gianotti.
Thanks, Sharon. Good morning, Mr. Verhofstadt. All sides seem to be saying that the political declaration on the future EU-UK partnership should be detailed. Is that possible to achieve in the time that remains?
Well, it's true that both sides want that it is detailed, because I think it's in the interest of both sides that when we have an agreement on the withdrawal and on the political declaration of the future, that we know what it means, that we don't have surprises, I should say, afterwards when we are detailing these proposals. I think it's still possible to have for October-November, can I say October-November, an agreement on a political declaration. But for that, we need to speed up, certainly, the negotiations in the coming months.
Clearly, there are concerns in the UK that we might be handing over £40 billion under the terms of withdrawal without having a very clear idea of the future deal.
But that's in the interest of nobody.
Right. Well, the UK government repeats its mantra that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, and that would imply that there would be some degree of conditionality. Is that something that the EU would accept?
I don't talk about conditionality. Look to the wording of Article 50. It's very clear. Article 50 is saying withdrawal agreement, taking into account your future relationship. So you cannot have a withdrawal agreement without also this political declaration. And that has been opposition from day one. For us, it's a withdrawal agreement, including transition as a part of the withdrawal agreement, and a political declaration on the future relationship, and that is exactly what the wording is of Article 50. So I cannot imagine that we have only one of these elements. You need them all on the table. In any way, the European Parliament, who has the final say from the European side on this agreement, will request to see this political declaration and will give also his opinion about this political declaration.
So the Secretary of State told us that much of the substance of the future framework could, in his view, be negotiated during the 6 months between October and March 2019. Do you agree that a future relationship treaty will be ready to be signed as soon as the Article 50 period finishes?
I see it a little bit differently. If the political declaration has to be a document that goes together with the withdrawal agreement that has to be presented at the moment of the withdrawal agreement, even when we can still discuss is it an annex of the withdrawal agreement or is it not an annex of the withdrawal agreement. Then starts the approval of this on the European level by Council and by the European Parliament. And in my opinion and in my expectation, we can then start to negotiate what is in this political declaration. But I take it will take more than a few weeks and a few months to do that.
Right.
I think that we will need, it shall be necessary to use the whole transition period to detail this political declaration. Because in any way, in our point of view, but we can come back to this certainly, hopefully, in course of this meeting, to detail an agreement in which we will have trade, a close trade relation, a close economic relation, cooperation on internal security, cooperation on external security, and then a whole list of thematic cooperations that will, we need for that more time than 3-4 months. Right. But that's not the problem. That's not the problem. That's the reason why there is, from both sides, the will to have a transition period. You call it an implementation period, we call it a transition period. I don't think that the word is so important, but we're going to use this whole period to detail, to put in practice, I should say, and to put into a detailed agreement the political declaration.
I think the problem is that business won't know where they stand, and people will be worried that we'll be paying money over under the withdrawal terms without necessarily having a deal.
Yeah, but that's the reason why we say, that was the first point that was made, that this political declaration need to be detailed. So you have to be very realistic. It's impossible from now until October, November, even February, March, to have full, in detail, our future relationship. And that is also not required by Article 50. What Article 50 requires is that we have an idea of how this future relationship will work. And I can tell you that not only European Parliament, but certainly all member states are looking to a very precise political declaration. So not to have later on in 2020, 2021 misunderstandings about what we have agreed on. And so it will, our aim, our goal is to have a detailed political declaration who gives enough certainty also to business and people, and at the same time who opens then the negotiation during 2-3 years during the transition to detail it. So I think on that there is no misunderstanding from both sides. I think that both sides know very well what they have to achieve in this 2 years.
Thank you.
Right, John Whittingdale is next.
Can I follow up some other questions which my colleague Jonathan has just put to you? The decision was taken very early on that the negotiation should be in 2 phases. But as Jonathan has just been suggesting, there has been a view that there might be some conditionality attached to particularly the financial settlement, depending upon the outcome, not of the political declaration, but the final outcome of the trade agreement, and that condition might be inserted into the legislation implementing the withdrawal agreement. How would you view any such conditionality?
As I already indicated in my answer a few moments ago, I don't talk in terms of conditionality. I talk in terms of the global agreement we have to achieve in October, November. And that includes a political declaration. The political declaration has to be very precise on what our future relationship will be, and will give the certainty to both sides, but certainly to everybody in the UK, what will be this future relationship.
But political declaration.
So then there is no need of conditionality.
But the political declaration is an expression of intent. It has no legal standing. And for some people, even though the political declaration might point in a direction which we are very keen to achieve, until we actually see the final form of the agreement, we believe that there should still be some conditionality attached to the withdrawal agreement.
Yeah, but for me, the political declaration is so that's the reason why I, a few moments ago, said that it's an open question where we're going to put it. You can put it as an annex of the withdrawal agreement. Then it becomes part of the of your whole withdrawal agreement, because then it will be an official, I should say, annex of the withdrawal agreement. My personal view is that should be the best way forward. But I have to recognize that there are people who are saying, no, don't make it so difficult. It can be a political declaration that exists next to the withdrawal agreement. But the best way to secure your concern is to make it an annex of the withdrawal agreement.
That might go some way, but the suggestion which has been made by ministers that there might be conditionality applied to the withdrawal agreement depending on the final outcome of the trade negotiations, going beyond the political declaration. How would you view that?
Yeah, but it depends on what they mean with the final outcome of trade negotiations. In top of that, our approach is that it doesn't only concern trade; it concerns a whole relationship. And secondly, does that mean that they're going to wait 2 years, 3 years? For me, the most important thing is what we achieve in October, November. And I believe in the good faith of both parties that what they agreed on in October, November will be duly implemented later on in the 2 years, 3 years afterwards. That doesn't mean that all the work is done, but the main political agreement will be done in October, November. And that will be for you and for us a key element to say yes or no to the withdrawal agreement. So, and that's also, and I repeat myself now for the third time, that is the reason why we think that it is absolutely key that it is a precise political declaration, so that there is no misunderstanding of what we're gonna what's gonna be the future relationship.
Okay.
And I'm gonna not enter Mr. Ben now in this, but I hope that we have the possibility that maybe to explain a little bit how we see that future relationship as we have expressed in our resolution.
Okay, can I just quickly ask you one other point? You have a long-standing record as being an advocate of closer integration of the European Union. To some extent, you must have regarded Britain as a brake on that process. For the last 40 years, every integration measure has been largely opposed by Britain. Is there a part of you that actually regards British withdrawal with a slight sense of relief in that actually now you can move perhaps faster in the direction you would like to see Europe go?
I still look to the Brexit decision as a failure of the European Union, because if an important country like the UK, a key country like the UK, is breaking away from the European Union, it's difficult to say, oh, it's a success. Fantastic. I don't look into this outcome of this referendum in that way. I think it's a failure, and it has opened our eyes in the European Union, and it has speeded up, accelerated the whole thinking about the reform of the European Union. That's true. So in a certain sense, and you see that also in the public opinion, what we have seen on the continent, if I may say so, that is that after Brexit, the European project regained popularity in the sense of, okay, maybe there are a lot of things that doesn't work very well in the European Union, but to break away, that's not maybe the good solution. So in that sense, since Brexit, there have been more debate on the reform of the European Union than we ever got in the years before. So that's caused by Brexit. But I still find the fact that Britain is going out of the European Union a bad thing for Europe, for Britain, and I think for everybody.
You've always made that clear, but it remains your view that when you talk about reform, actually what Europe needs is more integration and to continue further in that direction.
Well, it is more integration on some issues and less integration on other issues. It's not longer a question of less or more Europe, it's a question of an other Europe. The world order has changed, and Europe can bring an added value on a number of issues that are clear. I give one example, defense, for example. I think that there can be there is an added value of the European Union, or the European Union can bring an added value, not against NATO, but as, for example, the European pillar of NATO. It's obvious. If you look to the figures, what we spent on military and what our results are, that, if we should cooperate more intensively, that should be better than what we're doing now for the moment. So there, I'm for more integration. But on regulation on the internal market, I have my doubts that we need more regulation. On the other hand, we need, in some fields, less regulation, or another approach than we have today. So I am only in favor of a more integrated Europe, where you can prove an added value of this further integration. Other example next to defense, the migration crisis. I think we can only manage this migration crisis if we do it with European strategies and European policies, and not separately. So it's not a question for me of more or less, it's a question of another union who works differently than the union that you have left.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Verhofstadt.
Thank you very much. You've made it clear that it's not so much the word detail, but precise that you're after. Could you sort of tell us what, from the European Parliament point of view, would be this precision? What is the precision that you're looking for? And then also, a second question, what would happen if that deal wasn't negotiated by the end of 2018? And would there be enough time for the European Parliament to consider and vote on the withdrawal agreement if that wasn't there, the precision on the deal?
Yeah. So what we have, in fact, with the resolution, in total was a resolution containing 65 paragraphs. What even for the European Parliament is not a short resolution. We have described how we see that future relationship, and there are two elements in this. When you talk about what is precise, precise has first of all to be what is now, taking into account the institutional framework of the European Union. What is that relationship? To what category it belongs? It's not longer membership. No, that has to be clear. You're not longer a member of the European Union. What could it be? We think that it has to be an association agreement that is foreseen in our treaties, Article 8 and Article 217, and that gives, at the one hand, an enormous flexibility, because an association agreement can be very narrow. You can limit yourself only to trade, for example. But in an association agreement, you can be very broad. You can also put cooperation in foreign and security policy in it. And it is precise at the same time. It's flexible and precise because you're going to create one governance structure. And you're going to create not only one governance structure, but also one cycle of ratification. Because what I cannot imagine is that the outcome of all this, within 2 years, and when we have the political declaration and we are detailing this, that we will have an inflation of agreements between the EU and the UK, one on trade, one on internal security, one on external security, one on Euratom, one on this, one on that, and that this whole bunch, excuse me if I use that word, of agreements will be put in the ratification machine, may I say so, of the European Union, including the member states. We're going to be in ratification and in uncertainty for more than 1 decade, even 2 decades. So to avoid that, you need a system, I think, where you have one, we call it an association agreement, because that is foreseen in the treaty, we have tens of different... So don't think when I talk about association agreement of, oh yeah, he's talking about Ukraine. I'm not talking about Ukraine. Ukraine is an association agreement, but an association agreement is not Ukraine. An association agreement is a flexible instrument where you define your cooperation between the EU and a country, here the UK, with one governance structure and with one ratification cycle. The advantage of Mr. Ben, of an association agreement is that once it is approved by your side and by the European institutions, Council and Parliament, it's applicable in advance. You don't need to wait for the whole ratification by the 27 other member states, who can take some time. And yesterday in an intervention in Vienna before the Fundamental Rights Agency on Brexit, I have a text here for you, the document that I have used for my intervention. I explained how this should work with 3 layers. A layer on a cooperation and a committee of senior officials governing that association agreement. On the ministerial level, ministers governing, managing that association agreement. And then what I call the leadership level, the summits that will be organized in that framework of the association agreement between the EU and UK in the future. So, and there we can be very precise. Fourth, we have been very precise on what has that to cover, not only trade and economics, but also internal security, external security, thematic cooperation, going from Euratom until Horizon 2020, Erasmus, and so on. Now, it doesn't solve all the problems, naturally. If this solve all the problems, then it was easy. We got a miracle before us. We have now to put inside every of these pillars content. How we see this trade and economic cooperation, how we see this internal security cooperation. And we have been in our resolution very precise on how we see that, how based on the principles and of the single market and European Union, this could work. And we want to go the farthest as possible. Beyond membership, naturally, because you have decided not to be longer a member of the European Union. But we said, if single market is possible, why not? If EEA is possible, why not? If a customs union is possible, fair enough. It's very good. If this is not... But we are naturally bound by the red lines of the UK government. If the UK government says, for example, what they do, it's not possible to give to guarantee the freedom of movement of people. Then automatically falls the option of the single market. When the government is saying we want full autonomy, full competence on trade deals, on everything, so complete control on trade arrangements, then falls automatically the idea of a customs union. Okay. If the government says we don't want an oversight by the ECJ, then other options are not possible. But that these red lines, and that is what we have tried to do, make not impossible an association agreement.
Okay.
Just about the timetable, you didn't answer that question. What would happen if it failed? We failed to reach an association agreement. What would happen then?
Now, if we fail to have a withdrawal agreement, including a political declaration, then you have the cliff edge scenario where everybody is talking about. And that we have, in my opinion, to avoid absolutely, because that's the better solution for everybody.
Okay, that's very clear. Thank you very much. Stephen Crabb.
Good morning, Mr. Verhofstadt. You said previously that the UK should have a continuing role in European security, but that it will involve political compromises. Can you just expand a bit on that for the committee this morning and give us a sense of what you think those compromises should look like, both on the EU side and on the side of UK government?
Well, first of all, there are two different. There is internal security and external security. What I did yesterday was to give more evidence how we see as Parliament, and I think I'm in full. And Mr. Barnier has did also propose yesterday exactly in the same line. Yesterday we talked especially on the internal security, where naturally the interest of both sides is to have a close cooperation. But this cooperation will be a cooperation between the EU and a third country, the UK, as a chapter of the association agreement. And there we think that, and that's the reason why I have taken this document, because I describe very precisely how it would work. There are things that are possible and things that are not possible. For example, there is a request by the UK side to say, yeah, the European arrest warrant works very well. Okay, that's an added value of the European Union. European arrest warrant, you know, it has been introduced politically in 2001 after the 9/11 attacks. It has been formalized and introduced in the European Union in 2004. Only Italy has taken a longer transition period of 10 years, so there it is only in 2014 that the European arrest warrant. But everybody says added value, there is added value, because in the fight against terrorism, in the fight against organized crime, this is a very important and useful instrument. Well, it's naturally impossible for the UK to say, yeah, I want to stay in the European arrest warrant, and the European arrest warrant is the arrest warrant of the European Union. And as you are not a part of the European Union, you cannot be part of the European arrest warrant. But what we can do, and what we had offered yesterday, is let's make an extradition agreement that where we don't copy-paste classical extradition agreements as we have with a lot of other third countries, but where we try to go as far as possible to have the flexibility that is in the European arrest warrant. By shortening, for example, the periods that normally you have in an extradition arrangement that is not always flexible, that takes some time, months and months. So let's shorten that so that because it's impossible that the UK stays in the European arrest warrant, you have a flexible extradition arrangement that has at least nearly the same good, I should say, results as we have with the European arrest warrant.
Isn't the problem here is that your idea of compromise actually then just puts on the table something that falls far short of what could be possible between the UK as a third country and the EU? When you talk the language of compromise, actually all we're seeing on this side from the UK's perspective is just this very hard application of cold logic about what it means for Britain to be a third country, and that is leading us in a direction where we're going to have a much thinner security agreement than what many people had hoped and envisaged, and would lead to suboptimal outcomes for European citizens and for British citizens too.
Yeah, but you have to make a difference in politics, certainly, between what hope and what is possible. No, I have enormous hopes, but this is not always possible. I have also enormous dreams that are not always possible. So what is not possible is that, you say, we are out of the European Union, but okay, we stay member in Europol, we stay member in Eurojust, we stay member in the European arrest warrant.
Galileo, things like that.
But even going further than what you do today. Because today, Britain has a number of opt-outs in these policies, where they don't participate in these policies. And now what the UK government is requesting to participate in policies where the UK government in the past has never opted-in.
Mr. Verhofstadt.
And then I say, sorry, that is not possible. But we need to find a practical arrangement. So you are practical people. I think so. Britain is very well known for that, to be practical and efficient by being practical. So we need to have a practical arrangement where we try to have nearly all the advantages, I should say, of the instruments we use today, even more than the instruments we use today. But without saying, you are out of the Union, but in any way that doesn't change anything. You can be in all the policies and all the agencies and all the corporations of the Union. That doesn't make any sense.
But Mr. Verhofstadt, you said something very prescient a few moments ago about reflecting on Britain's decision to leave the European Union and regarding it as a failure of the EU. Yeah. And what many of us get the sense of at the moment, following these negotiations, is that there is a failure of pragmatism on the side of certainly of the Commission and of the approach of the EU more generally to these negotiations. And it is leading us in a direction, and it's fueling in this country a greater appetite for a no-deal scenario, which is in nobody's interest. Can you understand that?
Yeah, but maybe if you are a little bit flexible on your red lines, it could be also a little bit easier, don't you think so? That is what we have tried to do as Parliament. We see the European Union turning around its principles, and we see you turning around your red lines. And you can turning a lot of time like that for forever. So what we have tried to do with our proposal of an association agreement is to create a bridge between the red lines of the UK government and the principles of the European Union. And we have examined the idea, is there a space possible, a bridge possible between the two positions? We think, yes, that is based on this association agreement. And this association agreement will be specific, very intense, certainly in all the four fields, the four pillars that I have described. But don't expect that it means that you are, that you are still member of all. No, you go out, and then we see how we can do the damage and control, and how we can make a cooperation that is in the advantage of our citizens and of our companies. Okay. That's the way we are looking. But don't say, we go out, we have taken that decision, it's damaging the interests of our citizens and our companies. Well, give us now exactly the same as membership. That's not working. Sure. But I think everybody with some logic can understand it.
Sure. So just one final question, just to ground this in a very specific example. You're talking about the need for flexibility on our red lines. What do you think is the compromise that should be put forward from the UK government side to enable, for example, full participation and benefit from the Galileo programme?
That in the Galileo programme, there is a regulation that has been approved by the UK on how it will work and how this participation is possible for third countries. And so we're going to apply that. We have a regulation on that. On top of that, regulation has been approved by the UK. And it's not something that we have invented ourselves.
Except we had a request turned down for participating in procurement arrangements.
Our proposal is to foresee a partnership with the UK to Galileo inside the rules that we approved a few years ago and that we're going to apply. So there can be no misunderstanding on that issue. But yeah, it's I think a good proposal, a good example of how far you can go and what is possible and what is not possible.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Joanna Cho.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Verhofstadt. Just picking up on Stephen's questions there. As I understand what Mr. Barnier said yesterday, the reason the UK cannot leave the European Union and remain part of the arrest warrant is because we're leaving the jurisdiction of the court, we won't have the Charter of Fundamental Rights, and we won't have free movement. And these are all fundamental things that underpin the arrest warrant. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if we wanted to be in the European arrest warrant, we'd have to make ourselves subject to the Court of Justice and the Charter of Fundamental Rights.
Indeed, yeah.
Okay, you said there earlier that staying in the single market and the customs union would be an option for the United Kingdom, depending on what our red lines are.
Indeed.
And I think you're familiar with this document, Scotland's Place in Europe, that was produced by the Scottish Government in January 2016. And I think you're familiar, Mr. Verhofstadt, that Scotland voted 62% to remain. And what the Scottish Government have done in recognition of the fact that England and Wales voted to leave, Scotland and Northern Ireland voted to remain, is to propose a compromise whereby the whole of the United Kingdom would stay in the single market and some form of a customs union. So you're aware of that proposal that was put forward by the Scottish Government? Yeah. I
think there is no opposition from the European side if the proposal comes to Brussels.
That would solve the Northern Irish border problem as well, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. On the day after the Brexit vote, which is almost 2 years ago, you tweeted it's wrong that Scotland might be taken out of the European Union when it voted to stay. Happy to discuss with Nicola Sturgeon. Now, we all know that you've met the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, since then. Can you just elaborate on what your feelings are and the views of the European Parliament and the fact that Scotland voted to remain, but the citizens of Scotland are being taken out of Europe against their will? European Union.
Yeah, so I have tweeted about it, and so I stay behind my tweet. It's already an enormous achievement. It's obvious. Everybody sees the contradiction between people who have voted against and then are nevertheless, because of the institutional structure of your country, are obliged to follow a decision taken by a majority. But that's the way Great Britain is organized. We will not, and that I have said from day one, interfere in the institutional debate in Britain. That is not our responsibility. That's your responsibility. And that's the consequence of your institutional setup of Britain. But yeah, we have to recognize that for a number of people it has consequences. They are bound by a decision that they have not taken, and that their region or their nation, I don't know what word is most accurate, has been taken.
You also said in the aftermath of the British European Union referendum, if Scotland decides to leave the UK and to be an independent state, and they decide to be part of the European Union, I think there's no big obstacle to doing that.
I said that?
Yes.
And where is that? I don't remember me a tweet about that.
It was reported, it wasn't in a tweet, it was reported in September 2016 in the major Scottish newspaper, the Daily Record.
I am in any way, I repeat what I said, I will never, as a negotiator and a coordinator for the European Parliament, intervene in the institutional setup of any of the countries involved in this, and certainly not in the UK. I can understand a lot of these opinions that are expressed in Scotland, but it's not us who have to deal with it or to use or to abuse them.
On the floor of the European Parliament, has any concern being expressed about the fact that people in Scotland are being taken out of the European Union against their will? Has concern been expressed on the floor of the Parliament by parliamentarians?
Yeah. That's true. There is a huge concern about that is expressed in the plenary at every debate we have on Brexit and in every debate we have on the resolutions we have adopted. But I have to tell you, the resolutions that the Parliament has adopted have always been also supported by the people you are referring to.
So, just to summarise, the Parliament favour an association agreement.
Exactly.
But if the United Kingdom could bring itself to follow the compromise suggested by the Scottish Government of staying in the European Economic Area and a customs union, you would see that as a solution for the whole of the UK and also for the Northern Irish border problem?
In any way, there will be no objection by the European side if the UK government is going in such a direction.
But integral to that would be accepting the jurisdiction of the Court of Justice and the Charter of Fundamental Rights.
Yeah, indeed, that's one of the red lines for the moment of the UK government.
Thank you.
Okay, right. Richard Graham is next.
Welcome, Monsieur Verhofstadt. In terms of the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration that goes with it, all of us have agreed that there should be as much detail as possible. From your point of view, are the key elements of the detail fundamentally already agreed between the European Parliament and the European Commission, and do they fundamentally reflect Michel Barnier's chart of the 4 pillars? Or, for example, have you been able to take forward the discussion that we had briefly in Brussels on our last visit about the potential value, for example, of a pillar that encompasses financial stability and therefore financial services, as well as the 4 pillars that Monsieur Barnier uses?
So our approach is completely in convergence with what Michel Barnier. So he is working on 2 bases. His mandate is based on 2 elements. That is the guidelines that are approved by the Council, and they are precise and general at the same time. They are in any way a lot shorter than the position of the European Parliament. And his second element is the resolutions of the European Parliament. There have been 4 resolutions adopted. That is the source of his mandate. And, for that reason, you see that in our proposal, and it goes in exactly the same direction as Mr. Barnier's proposal to have these 4 pillars, this 4-pillar approach. The internal, external security, thematic cooperation, and the trade. Right. On your second question about financial services, I see that as a part of the trade and economic cooperation. It has to be solved and treated inside that first pillar.
And would you expect on the trade and economic pillar the detail, for example, of mutual recognition, services arrangements, financial stability and regulatory cooperation, so would you expect to see that sort of detail there?
Yeah, but I think that I know that many people talk about mutual recognition, but that's not the way we see it from the European side. Let me give you the example that of financial services. We see regulatory equivalence as the way forward for financial services.
What do you see the difference?
And regulatory equivalence, that means for us, if I can explain a little bit that concept, it is that Europe, also because our concern for financial stability, is making its regulation, is seeing if at the other side of the channel for some financial products there is a similar regulation. If that is the case, we can allow these products to come to the continent without any problem. But always with the possibility for the European side, where that is not longer the case, or when there is one or other external element, to stop this authorization of financial products coming to the continent. That's the way we see it. And we call that regulatory equivalence. So we decide on our regulatory framework on financial services. If we see that there is equivalence at the other side of the channel, that gives us the possibility to authorize products coming from mainly the City of London, I should say, to the continent, but always with the possibility to stop these authorizations from the side of the European Union. That's the way Commission, Council and Parliament in a unanimous way is looking to solve the problem of the financial services.
So the difference between regulatory equivalence and mutual recognition seems to me fundamentally about the starting principle. Mutual recognition is that we respect the regulatory environment of a nation and we trust them. If they say that XYZ company is a solid company to market those products in our nation, and vice versa. Whereas regulatory equivalence seems to be more about demanding precisely the same rules and regulations rather than trusting each other's regulators.
Yeah,
what do you see the difference?
Equivalence is equivalence. That doesn't mean always that it is identical. That's the reason why we use the word equivalence. But yeah, it guarantees the autonomy of the European Union and the European legislators. And that is what we are looking for, that we give not up in a mutual recognition process or capacity to regulate, certainly not in financial services. And that is the main difference, yeah.
Within the political declaration, then, your position from the Parliament's point of view and the Commission's are fundamentally identical at the moment. What are the areas where you might anticipate the European Parliament taking a different view? For example, have you been able to resolve potential differences about your views on citizens' rights, where you've been very strong, and I think a number of us have been very encouraged by that, about the ability for Britons working in one country in Europe to be able to transfer and work in another without having to...
That's what we call the onward mobility. So of UK citizens living on the continent. In the first draft of the report and of the withdrawal agreement a few months ago, there was foreseen that problem of onward mobility is purely an issue of the member states, and that member states could, in fact, limit onward mobility by requesting that people, UK citizens moving to another country, needed to have other permits. in a joint effort with the UK government. So European Parliament was capable to put that out of the withdrawal. You don't find anymore in the texts, the last drafts as they stand today, this provision. And that was very important. So because our goal is to guarantee onward mobility for UK citizens in the final draft and in the final agreement, be it in part of the political declaration, be it in the withdrawal agreement itself. That is not so important. But I want to achieve that. For the Parliament, it is impossible to agree with an agreement in which the onward mobility of UK citizens is limited to one country, because that is in contradiction with the essence of the European Union. And so we're going to fight for this, and I think that we won, I should say, the first battle by putting already the opposite out of the text, and we're going to go further in that direction. That I can assure you. There is another issue that is linked to that, and that we will certainly discuss that this afternoon, because I'm also invited by the Home Affairs Select Committee to testify. That is, okay, we are fighting, and we have not concluded yet on the best procedure to guarantee the citizens' rights after the withdrawal for our EU citizens living in Britain. But it's obvious that we need also the same smooth procedures for the UK citizens in the remaining 27, and it's our we have our goal is to scrutinise that in the 27.
Thank you. I mean, we had a preview, in a sense, of what the Department of Home Affairs is looking at in terms of the simplicity of process for EU nationals, and it was very encouraging. So I hope that session goes well. Can I just ask you lastly then, in terms of where you see the likely most difficult areas for agreement on the withdrawal agreement and political declaration, what do you think is going to be most difficult for us all to agree on?
By the two outstanding issues, the Northern Irish, what we discussed in the beginning, and secondly, the governance.
You don't see the future framework as being
you talk about the future framework, or about
because
the
withdrawal?
withdrawal?
Go together, because of the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration.
No, and for the future, certainly, how far can we go? How intense can be that relationship on trade and economics? And can we, for that, find a relationship that is respecting the red lines you have put forward, and not and is not in contradiction with the principles and the concepts in the European Union. That will be the most difficult thing.
Can I just leave you with a final sort of thought that, for so many of us, this process is about finding a way to have different institutional relationships, but for maximum continuity and minimum disruption as possible, and that is going to be the key to the success of the longer relationship between us and continental Europe. And I hope very much that the European Parliament will work with us on that.
Yeah, right. That was already the aim in the 50s, so it's come back to the past.
Seema Malhotra.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Verhofstadt, for coming to give evidence today. Just a small follow-up, firstly, on the questions just asked by my colleague, Richard. Would you see any kind of agreement around mutual equivalence solving the problem that some in the insurance industry have raised, where an insurance policy that may currently be operating across different countries or jurisdictions, there may be an issue with the legality of paying a claim in another country after we leave the EU if we don't have an agreement?
Well, possibly also there regulatory equivalence can be a solution, but I have to tell you I'm not so familiar with the specific insurance industry as you are to now tell you, okay, that there regulatory equivalence will also be applied. So if you allow me, I will take back the question that you have put to me and come back to you and come back to the committee.
That would be very helpful.
On that specific issue, is regulatory equivalence. That is the question. I understand also the way forward for the insurance industry.
Great, thank you. If I could ask you, Mr. Verhofstadt, just a point of clarification about the substance of the future framework and how long it will take to negotiate, because we had been told by the Secretary of State that he thought much of it could be done between October this year and March next year. I got the impression that you saw that as taking much of the transition period, which is a very different perspective. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think realistically that's how I see it. I don't see it possible that you have even when it is very detailed, and I hope that it's very detailed, this political declaration, that it is possible in 3 months or 4 months to detail that in a full-fledged agreement, including internal security, external security, thematic cooperation and trade. That is, in my opinion, I'm an optimistic by nature, so I'm an adept of Sir Karel Raimund Popper, who said that optimism is a moral duty, so I think that's true, but I'm not so optimistic that you can do that in 3 months.
Thank you. And if I could ask you then, your committee, you chair the committee in the European Parliament,
yep,
and Brexit subcommittee, which has been playing a very important role in engaging all the nations in the discussions about the relationship with the UK after Brexit. What effect do you see the election of a new Parliament and the appointment of a new Commission having on the content and speed of those negotiations in relation to the timetable for the future relationship treaty?
Normally that should have no influence at all. If we have a detailed political declaration in October, November, the new Commission can simply continue the work of the previous Commission, and based on the political declaration we have achieved. So normally it should have no influence, in the sense that, well, the only influence, it's a new commission has to work in itself and so on. This may be possible, but I don't see any influence or turbulence by coming in the new commission in 2019.
And with the European Parliament, would you see a very similar structure being established? Would that be one that you would see yourself?
Well, that will be a little different, because once the withdrawal agreement, including the political declaration of the future relationship, being agreed, then starts the detailing in what is, in our point of view, is an association agreement, and once that is finalized, that will come to the Parliament. And that will enter in the normal procedure, in the normal consent procedure. So an association agreement in that case, but even when it are other agreements, separate agreements on trade and on so, needs to be approved by the European Parliament. And then the normal committees of the European Parliament will be competent for that. So it will be not longer the Brexit steering group who will steer the process. It will be the plenary committees, so the normal legislative procedure that will apply.
So what role would you see yourself playing in that? Because you've obviously played a very...
First of all, I'm going to try to be re-elected in 2019, so I don't know what I will be at that moment. But when we started with the Brexit steering group, the aim was not to create a new body inside the European Union, but to create a system in which the European Parliament, who at the end needs to give the green light to the whole agreement, is involved from day one in the whole process. I know that you have a discussion here about a meaningful vote. We try to have not only a meaningful vote, we have more than a meaningful vote, because we have to say yes or no at the end of the whole process. And we have said, instead of going on holidays for 2 years and then at the end seeing the result, what is put on the table of the Parliament, it should be better that we are involved from day one. So what has been created is on the Council side the Brexit Working Group, and on the side of the Parliament the Brexit Steering Group. Normally it's the opposite. They are steering, we are working. This time they are working and we are steering. And these two, Brexit Steering Group and Brexit Working Group, are the two key players with our negotiator Michel Barnier. And there is a full, that's what we try to achieve, a coherence in this cooperation. But it's not the intention of the European Parliament to say, oh, we're going to institutionalize this and we're going to have forever a Brexit steering group.
In fact, I'll ask one final brief question on the issue of freedom of movement, which obviously has been an ongoing point of contention. Other countries across the EU have different forms of controls they have in, or whether it is around how quickly you need to find work and conditions around freedom of movement. Do you think there is much more that that Britain could be doing, even within what's available now?
Well, it has always been my opinion that inside the existing framework of the freedom of movement and the existing legislation of freedom of movement in Europe, member states have a lot of room of maneuver. And that not always all countries, certainly not the UK, have used all this room of maneuver. And that was one of the discussions we got as European Parliament negotiators directly when we got this negotiation with Mr. Cameron. Argument was, why don't you fully use the room of maneuver that is in the existing legislation to control, to manage, to a certain extent limit migration. So, I can give the example of Belgium if you want, where we are very keen, for example, on social security benefits for migrants. Maybe so for some people that we are too harsh on this. I think that we are far more tougher on this than whatever has happened in the past in Britain.
And does that surprise you? Does it surprise you that Britain hasn't taken advantage of what's actually
It's
available?
the autonomy of every country to use the possibilities in the European legislation. But it was always my impression that this room of maneuver that exists in the migration legislation and the freedom of movement legislation in Europe has not been fully used by some of the member states and by the UK particularly.
Okay. Emma Roots.
Thank you. Good morning. Given the complexity of the negotiations and the major outstanding issues, how confident are you that an agreement will be reached on the withdrawal agreement and political declaration in order for our Parliament to vote on it, and indeed the European Parliament to vote on it, by the end of the year?
I'm still confident that it is possible to reach an agreement in October, November, even when I know that for the political declaration it means that you have only, after summer break, 9-10 weeks to achieve this. But if the political will is there, it is possible. And I hope already to see indication of that in the new white paper that the British government will publish in 2-3 weeks. I don't know the exact date. Maybe there are other people in the room here who can tell us the exact date when this white paper will be published. But we hope to see there already an indication of possible solutions for that political declaration.
Many of us perceive that there have been delays along the line. For example, you mentioned the white paper, which we thought was going to be published before the June summit, and now it seems that it will be published afterwards. Is there a possibility of a delay in the whole timetable? If, for example, the European Parliament didn't receive the political declaration and the withdrawal agreement until the start of next year, would that give you enough time to scrutinise?
No, normally we need 3 months.
3 months.
In our procedures to go from an agreement that is put on the table and the plenary vote, and the vote in plenary. That's normal. So if there is some small delays in October now, weeks more, that is we can manage that. But maybe we have not to say that too loud, because that's not putting the pressure on those who will have to reach a deal.
And what is the latest that it could come to you? Because obviously you've got the European Parliament elections as well, so Parliament starts to wind down.
Well, you can yourself, if I say 3 months before the end of the year, that is the ultimate date. Otherwise, we cannot be sure to have a vote in plenary in March.
And if it did fall back beyond that, what would be the attitude of the European Parliament, and indeed yourself, of any proposal to extend Article 50? I know that's not on the table at the moment, but hypothetically.
Yeah, but I think it's not a good moment now to start to bid on can we have 3 weeks more there or 4 weeks more there. I think it takes the pressure away for those who have to deliver in October, November. That are practical. There are certainly for that practical solutions if it is a question of weeks, but that is not the main point here. The main point is the political will and the capability to reach a detailed political declaration in October, and it can be November, no problem. But you cannot go beyond, I think, the year 2018.
Okay. Assuming that that is the case and that there is an agreement by November, December, when realistically could the negotiations on the future partnership, following on from the agreement in the political declaration, when realistically would they start, given that we're going to have European Parliament elections and we're going to have a new team in
Immediately. There is no reason why they could not start immediately. But again, I think it's not very realistic to think then that within 3 months everything can be concluded. That is what my point is. But immediately, there is no reason why there should be a delay or why we should say, oh, we're going to wait until a new commission is there or a new parliament is there. No. The new commission and the new parliament will be bound by the political declaration approved, by the political declaration who goes in parallel with the withdrawal agreement approved by the European Parliament. Okay. So they are bound about that. So there is no need then for to say, oh, we need a new approval by not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
That's good news.
We are an ordinary parliament.
And in your experience, not only in the European Parliament, but obviously as a minister and prime minister of your country, when it comes to negotiating with third countries, will we have enough time to sort out all the detail before the end of 2021?
Before the end of the transition, I see that possible, yeah. I don't think that it is impossible. I know that people are saying, we have all seen trade negotiations who take 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. But we are not strangers for each other, no. We have worked together, I think, quite a lot in the same environment. So it's not that we start from nothing at all. On the contrary, we start from an environment that we know very well. And that you know very well. So I think it's possible to sort all these 4 pillars, because we see 4 pillars in such an agreement, out before the end of the transition, what you call implementation period. And that will naturally it will be necessary to go forward on the 4 fronts, on the 4 pillars from day one. And we're going to not start by saying, oh no, we start with pillar 1 and then if we conclude then we go to pillar 2. No, it has to be a process in which on the 4 main pillars of that agreement we go forward.
Okay, one final question. On the customs arrangements, the government is still deciding whether it's going to put forward maximum facilitation or customs partnership.
Yep.
It seems that the EU is not very keen on either of those proposals. In your view, are either of those proposals workable, and would they be workable from the end of the transition?
You mean what proposal? Because we have seen a lot of proposals.
Yeah, so the customs partnership, whereby in some way or another the UK polices...
no, that is not that's not possible.
Rules of origin.
No. We're going to not outsource our competences on customs duties and customs arrangements.
Okay, so
we're going to not do that. But that we have said already months and months and months ago. That this idea that the UK will take over our competence on the customs border, that will not happen.
Okay, well that's very clear, and the Irish government have been very clear that the maximum facilitation proposal isn't something that they could have...
The what?
The maximum facilitation, where somehow technology that has not yet developed could be used...
Yeah, but that was mostly that is a proposal that already dates from quite a lot of time and was a proposal in the framework of the Northern Irish border. And I have been always skeptical about that. I have said it from day one because you use scans and cameras. Yeah, that's a border. It's still a border. So, and it's still a physical instrument, no? And I don't think that it is wise to do so, because if you put some physical instruments on the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, I think it's a dangerous step to do, and that could be the return of violence there. So I was always very skeptical to this idea. Yeah, but okay, technical evolution is so fast that all borders worldwide will disappear tomorrow. I don't believe that.
So we're still a long way from having a precise agreement on the customs arrangement for the political declaration and to avoid the border on the island of Ireland.
There we are still we have still to work it out. Yeah, we know that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you say, Mr. Verhofstadt, that you're giving evidence to the Home Affairs Committee this afternoon?
Yeah, I have to go there for a 1-hour session about two things. I think two topics: the citizens' rights, where we are in the practical, because there are a lot of questions. The questions are not longer on the principles. The questions are more in detail how it will work in practice for UK citizens and for EU citizens, and so for both sides. And the second is on how we react on the government's proposal concerning internal security. That's the point that we already a little bit discussed a few moments ago. Okay. That are, I think, I think the two items for this afternoon.
Well, you'll earn your money.
So it's a full day in the House of Commons for me.
I want to take you back to the subject that the chairman began with, which is this question of Northern Ireland and the border.
Yeah.
What is your understanding or explanation of what the UK government agreed to when in December, in paragraph 49 of the joint declaration that was agreed, it says, in the absence of agreed solutions, the United Kingdom will maintain full alignment with those rules of the internal market and the customs union, which now or in the future support North-South cooperation, the all-island economy, and the protection of the 1998 agreement. What do you think that means?
I think it's so precise and so clear that there is no interpretation possible. It's exactly what you have read, and that has been confirmed in the letter that Mrs. May have sent to President Tusk 3 months later. Yeah, it's 3 months later. Yeah, more or less 3 months later, in preparation of the previous council. But again, this is a backstop. It is not the solution. It is the arrangement if there is no solution that can be found that avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic.
How broadly should we interpret the phrase, those rules of the internal market, in this?
The rules of the internal market. As the rules of the internal market. It's the whole acquis. That's the acquis. You know the acquis. You are part of the acquis for the moment. So every rule that you now apply in the single market is covered by that sentence.
Yeah, but I just want to clarify this. In your interpretation, is this the full acquis or is it selected rules of the internal market?
No, it's the full acquis normally. If it is the full acquis, yeah.
So this morning, for example, Charles Grant, who's quite a well-informed, well-connected commentator here, he's writing in the Financial Times, and he says that the government may try to stay in the single market for goods only, partly to resolve this question. I don't know if he's right or wrong. I don't know if the government...
No, it's also it's not an easy point naturally to stay in the single market only for goods, when in most goods there is 40% of services involved. Huh? And to say, oh, that good here that has two parts, some physical molecules, and there are some services involved in it, is a very... I don't believe in this possibility to, when we talk about single market, to say, oh yeah, that's goods and that's services. They are in modern world, in our modern economy, they are so interlinked that it will be very difficult, if not impossible.
Why is it that in the proposals that the European Union has published about their own backstop, more account was not taken of paragraph 50 of what was agreed in December, which says, again, I'm quoting, in the absence of agreed solutions as set out in the previous paragraph, the UK will ensure that there are no new regulatory barriers developed between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. Isn't the logic of what was agreed in December not just that Northern Ireland must remain aligned in terms of regulatory convergence, but that the whole of the UK, if both of these paragraphs are to be taken together?
Yeah, but everybody, we are all in politics, I think, so everybody can see what the meaning of these paragraphs were, and that there was some contradiction between the paragraphs. That happens a lot of times in politics. I come from Belgian politics, so certainly with our communitary differences, I can tell you that that can happen. But it's clear that every commentator has seen that there was that there is some tension, I should say. I'm going to be very cautious between the different paragraphs that you have mentioned. You cannot apply them all fully, all the paragraphs. That's against logic.
But your interpretation to us on paragraph 49 is that this is not about selected rules of the single market. This is the full trade in goods and services. Is that what you're telling us? And in terms of the models available to the UK, you said in response to my colleague Joanna Cherry a little while ago, all this is available, single market, EEA, customs union, however you want to brand it.
You name it. Yeah.
It is not a question of the European Union saying you can't do this. Right. This is a question of the UK's red lines.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Sammy Wilson.
You said in an answer to Joanna Cherry that the EU will not interfere in the institutional arrangements of the UK. Yet in February you told the Constitutional Affairs Committee of the European Parliament that you would fight to keep Northern Ireland under EU rules. Do you not see that as some contradiction insofar as that, first of all, would take Northern Ireland constitutionally into a different place within the United Kingdom, and more important, and equally importantly, would also interfere with the very delicate balance within the Belfast Agreement, which indicates that there can be no change in the constitutional position of Northern Ireland without the consent of the people of Northern Ireland.
I think that we did never, I have never, and certainly not other people in the Parliament have never made any statement about the constitutional future of Northern Ireland. Never. What we are, our comments are based on the necessity to keep the peace process in Northern Ireland and all the elements of the Belfast Agreement and of the and everything what has been achieved there. That is of concern, but we have never made any statement on the constitutional future of Northern Ireland. As I indicated, we have enough difficulties with our own institutional structures in the European Union not to be involved in a debate on the constitutional future.
Well, do you not recognise that if you insist that Northern Ireland stay under EU rules and EU laws as opposed to UK laws, that does change the constitutional position of Northern. You might not call it that, but that's in effect what it does, and that is contrary to the Belfast Agreement, which you've quoted, the peace agreement, because the peace agreement is based on the premise that Northern Ireland's constitutional position cannot change except with the consent of the people of Northern Ireland, not with the dictates of Europe.
But again, our concern there and our agreement also with in the December report and then later on in the letter confirmed by Mrs. May is that there's no hard border or hardening of the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. That's the starting point, and all the rest is the consequence of that. I visit the border. There is no border. The reality today is there is no border. The only way that you can see that there is a border is in one side the signs on the road are white, and on the other side the signs on the road are yellow. And I have completely forgotten where it is yellow and where it is white for the moment. But it's the only way to see that there was in the past a border. There is no. And it's so good that and nobody wants that it returns a border there. So that is the starting point of the whole process of our thinking. Our thinking, the starting point of our thinking is not, we need to have a change in the constitutional order in Britain, we need to have another status for Northern Ireland. That's not our business. Our business is how we can avoid a border or a hardening of the border between both of them. And everybody agrees that if there is alignment and between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, that should mostly solve the problem. You know that already today for a number of agricultural products, the controls are done not on whatever border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, but in the ports, the seaports of Northern Ireland. That's done already. That's today. That's today the reality. So what we in fact propose is not so far from the reality of today.
Well, you're wrong, in fact, to say that there's no border. First of all, there's a political border, but secondly, there's a fiscal border, because there are differences in tax rates between the Irish Republic and the UK.
And there are miles at one hand and kilometres at the other, so that I know. But
no, there are fiscal differences as well. Taxes have to be collected; doesn't require a hard border. There are some regulatory differences which are facilitated without a hard border. There are currency differences which are facilitated without a hard border, and all of those kinds of things would exist if the UK was in a different customs arrangement than it is at present with the EU, or a different regulatory arrangement than it is within the EU. If it can be facilitated at present without a hard border, why do you envisage a hard border being put in place if we were to leave the customs union in a single market?
But automatically, if the whole of the UK is leaving and there is no regulatory alignment anymore, there will be a necessity to control the import and export of goods.
We deal with regulatory differences at present without the hard border that you're talking about.
No, you make part now of the same single market and the same customs.
But we still have some differences which have to be.
That's true. There are also a lot of differences, I can tell you, between Belgium and France, and Belgium and the Netherlands, and Belgium and Germany. All these differences exist. That's not the point. The point is not that there are no differences in policies and differences in countries and flags and whatever you want, and in taxes. But that's not the point here. The point is that by leaving the single market, by leaving the customs union, automatically that creates a hard border that has to be controlled. That's the point. That's the point what we are discussing. That's our discussion about Ireland and Northern Ireland, because everybody says, yeah, but we don't want a hard border. And then comes the question, how to achieve that?
And I think that's something which many people fail to comprehend, that you've accepted there are fiscal differences between France and Belgium, there are regulatory differences between France and Belgium, as there are between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic at present, yet they can be facilitated without a hard border. But you're saying that once the UK leaves the EU, they can't be facilitated.
Yeah, but
they can't be facilitated because of the differences.
But you can. There is a single market. There are no customs duties, no customs controls. With your products, you go from one country to another. That's the way it works in a single market. And what you give up by going out of the single market is exactly that. So that we need to control imports, exports, conditions, qualities of products, and so on and so on. This administrative burden is created by going out of the single market and out of the customs union. So maybe we can find a lot of solutions in the future relationship to avoid that. That's another issue. It's difficult to deny that the decision to leave the union has created there a problem, and that problem is different than what you try to tell me, that, oh, yeah, this is the same as, for example, the regulatory difference and the tax difference between the member states of the European Union. It's not the same.
Well, how are tax differences collected at present without the hard border you're talking about?
Yeah, but there is nobody on the border between France and Belgium controlling if you have paid your taxes in Paris or if you will pay your taxes in Brussels.
How are the different tax rates collected at present when, for example, alcohol travels from the Irish Republic to the UK? There's a tax difference. How is it collected at present?
I'm not a specialist of what's happening between Northern Ireland and the UK, but what you're telling me now is that there is a kind of an invisible border between the UK mainland and the Northern Irish and Northern Ireland. So what do you have then against the backstop?
So I think the point that I'm trying to make is that taxes can be collected without physically stopping vehicles and checking what's on them and working out what the tax is required to be paid. So if it's possible to do it now inside the EU, why is it not possible to do it outside the EU? The same technical ability will remain.
I think we have a difference of point of view that is more of conceptual nature.
Well, let me just move to another promise that you've made. You've promised that you don't want to interfere in the institutional arrangements of the United Kingdom, yet you say you will fight to keep Northern Ireland under EU law. You've also promised the Irish Republic that Ireland would not pay the price of Brexit. Maybe you could tell us, how would you propose that the Irish economy is protected from not having access to the GB economy, which accounts for 40% of their exports, or would not find its trade disrupted through the having to use GB as the land bridge between the Republic and the rest of Europe? What proposals in the future trade arrangement would you see the EU putting forward to ensure that the promise which has been made to Ireland that it will not pay the price of Brexit?
Well, I think that we have to, and that is what we have said to our friends in the Irish Republic, that is that we have to see that this future relationship is a relationship that is minimizing, in fact, the effect on their economy. That's first of all. And secondly, we have to see also how we can help their economy, which is a vibrant economy, in Ireland, in the Irish Republic, so that if there are negative effects, it can be compensated. That are the two elements we are looking for. And three, on the transport issue, we are looking also to that. What is the best way to avoid disruption, even in the case of a hopefully not a cliff edge scenario, because that should be a disaster for them. Certainly for their transport and logistics that they are using.
And for people in Northern Ireland, the maintenance of a vibrant economy south of the border is equally important, which is the reason why this question is important, as to what practical arrangements will the EU propose in negotiations with the UK government to ensure that the Irish economy does not get cut off from its single main market for its exports.
You're talking not about the Irish economy in the south or in the Northern Irish?
No, the Irish economy in the south, because I mean the proposals for
the Irish Republic.
The Irish Republic. Specifically, what proposals do you see the EU putting forward to ensure that the promise that the Irish economy will not suffer as a result of Brexit and will be protected in these negotiations?
Well, the best way to do it is to come back to square one and to be in the single market and in the customs union. That should solve all the problems.
Well,
but that is not on the table for the moment. But okay.
Okay, the UK has said that is not on the table. So to deliver on the promise which has been made to the Irish government, what proposals do you see the EU putting forward to protect the Irish economy?
Now, what I said, the 3 points that I have indicated a few moments ago. First of all, in the future relationship, with the UK a system that minimize, it will be not zero, that's true, but minimize the negative impact for them. Secondly, in a certain way compensate because of the strength of the economy on the continent and of the Eurozone can also be a second element. And the third element is we are certainly looking to very concrete proposals for their logistics because that's for them critical, that they can have a continuous flow to their products and services to the continent. That are the three things that we are looking at.
Do you recognise...
Okay, Sammy, we are... Well,
just one last question.
No, Sammy, we're going to have to move on. You've had longer than everybody else. Andrea Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to touch upon some of the questions that my colleagues have already asked you. Regarding the 38 billion divorce settlement from the EU, what we're going to give you, when is the EU expecting to receive the 38 billion from the UK?
The
38 billion pound from the UK. When are you expecting to receive it?
It's at the moment of the approval of the withdrawal, yeah.
So when do you expect that to be?
So the approval of the withdrawal in March next year. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. If this is truly a two-way negotiation, what is the EU prepared to give or give up for the UK?
But the question is, the negotiation is within the framework of Article 50. So it's a question of we have to make a settlement on the finances, we have to get the citizens' rights okay, and it's not a question of a trade-off in the sense, oh, by the way, if you give in on this, we're going to be more...
well, I'll rephrase it then. What areas do you
in that way, it's not a
compromise?
Classical negotiation, like between two political parties, for example, sitting around the table to make a government and to give in on their principles. And they expect it from both sides that they are doing it, otherwise they cannot make a government. So it's not that. It's not a classical political agreement. It's a country leaving the Union. We have to do that rule-based on the way it is described in the treaty, and we don't want trade-offs in a classical political sense. Also, we have indicated, as a second example to give you, that we will never accept a trade-off, for example, between, we're going to give you a good cooperation from the British side on internal security and on external security if you give us a good deal on trade and economics. We will never accept that. This is not a classical political trade-off, dealing and wheeling between political parties.
So is there any areas that you're prepared to compromise?
We do it every day, in the sense that, and I'm not on the negotiation table, it's Mr. Barnier who is doing that, and there is already a first list, 80% of the withdrawal agreement, as I indicated in the beginning, 7 more technical points today, so they are making agreements. But you will agree with me that it's not always easy to combine, to have a marriage, if I may say so, between red lines at the one hand and principles at the other hand. But naturally, it's the art of politics to find the way out, and that is what we try to achieve with all the skills that we have, and that in the interest of both parties, because I think that the worst scenario for both parties is that of, a no deal, and then we see what's happened afterwards. The disruption that would create in the economy, not only on the continent, but certainly in Britain, should be huge, and that we have to avoid.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to, you mentioned about free movement and your existing policies, and that you mentioned that some countries are not really taking you up on the flexibility within the existing framework. In the existing framework regarding freedom of movement, is there an ability to purely allow an immigration system, for example, with the UK, based on the skills need of the country only?
No, our migration.
I'm trying to understand how flexible.
Our migration system, let's be honest, is merely a nation-state system. There is, in fact, that's always my criticism, no European migration system. The only point is that inside the single market you have a freedom of movement of people, and that, for example, people with skills in construction companies of Poland or another can come here. Unfortunately so. So I am I'm a lot of times in Britain, and when I go to a hotel or to a hospital, then I see a lot of these people with these skills coming from other countries in the European Union working here, and that's good, I think. Labour mobility in Europe, let's be honest, is low. Everybody's talking about this enormous problem of labour mobility. Labour mobility in Europe, you know what it is? It's 1%. You know what it is in the US? 10%. So that means concretely that only 1% of the workforce in Europe is moving to another country to work there, temporary or not temporary. In the US, it's 10%. 10% of the workforce on a yearly basis is going to another state, is going to another part of the country, under several constitutions, because every of these states in the US have their own constitution and their own flag and their own system. So labour mobility, okay, I didn't find it a big issue. You find it a big issue. Okay, I can understand it, but it's only 1%. And this 1% makes that, in fact, in total, also Britain included, the number of vacancies in Europe is 3 million. Why? Because of a lack of labour mobility. And so, okay, I have not to judge for the whole debate during the referendum about migration. Well, it was about, it's not migration coming from outside the European Union. The debate was about the labour mobility inside the Union. Well, I tell you, the labour mobility in the Union is fairly good under control because it's only 1%.
Right, final question, Chair, if that's okay.
Sure.
You touched on earlier about strengthening your defence capability.
Yeah.
During the referendum campaign, our then Prime Minister David Cameron said it's completely untrue and it was not going to happen, that a European army would never be established. Is this your aim? Would you like to see a European army?
I am in favour of a European defence community as a pillar of NATO, European pillar. So NATO for the moment is still an organisation of nation states, and I think we're going to go into an alliance that is more based on pillars, an North American pillar, European pillar, and so on. Secondly, my opinion is that the European defence community, that it is the way forward also to do something to our lack of responsibility in defence matters. Because
so what does this look like then?
What does it look like?
So does it look like an army?
Well, look, I can send you, it's a very interesting document, the proposal of the European defence community of 1952-53. Because it's not a new proposal. It exists already on the table in 52-53. Everything was how it should work, who could participate, what troops would be put at the disposal of this European defence community. And that is, in my opinion, the only way to make better use of the enormous amounts that we put in military, because Europeans put more or less 42% of the Americans in military. That's 3 times more than the Russians. Europeans put 3 times more money in military than Russia. But I'm not sure that we are capable to do the number of operations of the Russian army. I don't think so. So the reason is an enormous waste of money. Because the non-existence of European defence community, and it's not, in fact, compensated by the inflation of bilateral arrangements we have between countries. So I think, you call it an army, you can call it as you wish, but the European defence community should be an enormous saving of money, and at the same time an increase of the security of this continent, which is today not capable to take its responsibility in its own neighbourhood.
Thank you very much. Just finally, do you think any of the countries will follow the UK and leave the EU? Can you see it on the horizon?
Well, that was the fear everybody got after the Brexit. I remember that.
Can you see it on the horizon?
There were countrymen of you that are present in the European Parliament, a leader of a certain party called UKIP. I don't know how it is with UKIP for the moment here in the country, but who was there, and we said, there will be now a follow-up. After Brexit, there will be a Dexit, the Danish going out, Nexit, the Dutch going out, Frexit, the French going out. Fortunately, you have not seen a domino effect in that sense.
Okay.
in the country, like I indicated in the beginning of this
you see it happening in Italy?
hearing. But in Italy, both parties who were very Eurosceptic are today the most Europhile parties that I have ever heard. They don't want to go out of the euro. They say it's stupid to go out of the European Union. So even Eurosceptics have understood it. But Eurosceptics on the continent, I know here on Britain, yes. I'm not capable to qualify Eurosceptics here in Britain. Okay. But the Eurosceptic parties, or in Europe after Brexit, or lost the elections, like in the Netherlands, because there are Europhile parties who won it, or the Eurosceptic parties changed completely their opinion and find now that the euro is a stable element of their economy and don't want to go out neither of Europe, neither of the European Union. But that doesn't mean, and that's my point at the beginning, that we don't need to reform. I'm even more Eurosceptic than all Eurosceptics in Britain concerning the actual way of doing in the European Union. I don't think that system is sustainable, the European Union, as it exists today. It has to be reformed, in my opinion, in a federal sense. It's the only way it can work.
Okay.
So there I have some common ground with the Eurosceptics.
Other colleagues who have still to come in, and Stephen Kinnock is next.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Verhofstadt. The British media today is reporting the draft conclusions of the 29th of June European Council summit, where the European Council is saying it expresses its concern that no substantial progress has yet been achieved on agreeing a backstop solution for the Irish border. Do you agree that do you think that the 29th of June summit is going to make any significant or substantial progress at all in terms of these Brexit negotiations?
Well, I think the progress is what I have indicated in the beginning, and that's that common statement that has been made by Mr. Davies and Mr. Barnier yesterday, I think, where they indicate the progress in the withdrawal agreement in 7 specific fields of the withdrawal agreement. But I don't expect more than that now, to be realistic.
Thank you. On this issue of the Irish border, which seems to be the fundamental stumbling block, not least because it connects the withdrawal agreement to the political declaration. It's the kind of umbilical cord between the two. The European Parliament has advocated an association agreement.
Yep.
Do you see an association agreement being a basis for resolving the Irish border issue?
Well, it doesn't solve all problems, naturally, an association agreement. An association agreement is a framework in which you can create a relationship based on one governance, one ratification cycle, with democratic institutions and covering everything what you want. But it is not a miracle. It doesn't. You cannot say, we have an association agreement and now the border issue between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic is solved. You still need to decide on content, on what you put in the trade and economic pillar of that association agreement. Will it be, what will it be? Single market, customs union, EEA, less than EEA, only a bespoke trade deal? That you need still to fill in such an association agreement. So an association agreement is not taking away the hard political choices that have to be made between the two negotiating parties, but it creates a framework that is foreseen in the treaties, that is understandable, creating governance structures to manage this future relationship between both.
Isn't time a major factor here? And the reality is that we have a very narrow and narrowing everyday window of opportunity. So the reality for resolving the Irish border issue is now there has to be an off-the-shelf solution, and that has to be the EEA plus a customs union. Isn't it now just time to inject some honesty into this discussion and recognise that that is the only realistic solution on the table?
It's to you to conclude on that, not to me to conclude on that. I have, if there were no red lines of the UK, then I see very easy to find the single market and as the solution, for example. But that's to you to decide on this. Even when I have understand it, I don't know if it's true. People said to me, "Don't use the word EEA." I said, "Why can I not use the word EEA? That's a toxic word in Britain." I said, "Okay, a toxic word." Are there other toxic words in
because it has the word Europe in it. It contains the word Europe. That's why.
The word Europe also toxic.
Stay away from that.
Okay. Stay away from it. And I have to go out then. Again, for the European Union side, there is no problem to talk about any solution that is put forward by the British side, can go until the single market and so on and so on, because we want the closest relationship as possible with so if your question is, if the British government comes forward with a proposal where they merge a little bit some policies of an approach like EEA with, for example, customs union, would there be an opposition by the European Union? There will be no opposition and no problem with the European Union. The problem is not the European Union. The problem is how you marriage the red lines of the UK with what Michel Barnier is always calling the ecosystem of the European Union, the rule-based system of the Union.
Yeah.
You cannot ask us to have a fantastic solution that gives up our system. That we will not do.
Going back to the idea of the association agreement, one of the criticisms that's levelled at the European Economic Area is this thing about going from being a rule maker to a rule taker. Isn't it the case that under an association agreement that would be even more problematic, because the EEA countries do actually participate in the shaping of European regulations and directives through expert committees, through the EEA Joint Committee. You also have the EFTA Court these are well-established institutions, whereas with an association agreement you have far less of a stake and a far weaker leverage in terms of the actual making and shaping of the acquis.
Well, my answer to this is that the association agreement has an enormous flexibility. You can put a lot of fields in it, or only limit yourself to one or another field. Secondly, you will put in place a governance system where we will have a governance structure between the UK and the EU on senior level, on ministerial level, and on leadership level. So it will be a bespoke system. And where we will have 2 times a year, 1 time a year, I don't know, a summit between EU and UK. Well, we have joint association councils between ministers, British ministers and EU ministers responsible for the European Union, governing that agreement, and at the same line on the level of senior officials. So it is it's not possible to compare it immediately with saying it's that type of influence that the UK side will have.
I mean, it sounds
it's bespoke.
What you're setting out sounds very attractive in terms of its bespoke nature. But do you think that it's realistic that we would have the leverage, given how little time there is and how much goodwill has been burned already, that we'd have the leverage to create something new, if you like, pull a rabbit out of the hat, which I think is what you're suggesting, really, that you can have a very wide-ranging association agreement in draft format in the political declaration, and that members of Parliament here would then be expected to vote for that, in the hope that we would then be able to strike a deal which both gives us the kind of access to the single market that we want, but also deals with this issue of sovereignty and rule maker, rule taker. What you're talking about here sounds attractive but vague.
But it's not a rabbit out of the hat now. The rabbit is already a long time out of the hat, I should say, because we have already months and months and months ago said that this was the way forward in association agreement, first. Secondly, I think that we are very precise in our resolution how it would work. And yesterday I have, in this intervention in Vienna before the Fundamental Rights Agency, given more details about the governance structure of such an agreement. If we go on on that line, and three, the main point, the main attractive point is that you have then a system where you have one governance, one ratification cycle. To manage all this, instead of what, in my opinion, would be a disaster. That is that we make that we follow the Swiss example in our future relationship, and we are making 10, 20, I don't know, 100 deals. Some are mixed, others not mixed, and that we entering in a period of 2 days of uncertainty about the ratification of all this. We need to be. We are lawmakers. You are lawmakers. We are lawmakers. So we need to be very prudent on that. We need to have a system that works from day one, and that and there I think the association agreement solves it, but it doesn't solve all the problems. We still need to have the discussion: how far will be the cooperation on trade and economic matters, and so that and there you have the different types and proposals and possibilities that you have mentioned in your intervention. It doesn't solve all the problems, but it creates an understandable and comprehensive framework in which it will be more easy, in my opinion, for both parties to come to a conclusion than turning around the principles and turning little rounds around the red lines.
Thank you very much. Just one final question then. Have you received any specific feedback on that proposal from the UK government?
I thought that a number of people see the advantage of it, yeah, okay, and the logic behind. Okay. So I'm waiting for, as you, for the white paper of the government to see if it has made any progress.
Thank you very much.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Chair. Can I first of all take you back to something you said earlier? You were responding to concerns that the UK will find itself committed to paying up to €39 billion in the withdrawal agreement without any legal certainty about what the future relationship between the UK and the EU will be. And you suggested one helpful step could be to make the political declaration an annex to the withdrawal agreement. Can you just tell us what the impact of that would be? Are you suggesting that if that was done, then that would make the political declaration legally binding? Is that what you were suggesting?
Yeah, indeed. I'm not saying that this is the position of the European Union. I give you my personal opinion about it. I think it's not a bad proposal to do so, to give more legal certainty for everybody, for both sides. But there are also people who are saying, no, political declaration is a political declaration that has a political meaning, and you cannot mix that with withdrawal agreement, what is a legal act. Huh?
Do you think the European Commission would be happy to proceed in that way?
That is a question that you have to ask to the European Commission. I cannot answer for them.
Okay. Can I take you back to the question of continuing freedom of movement within the EU for UK citizens who live in the EU? And you've made it very clear the European Parliament is going to fight to achieve that. Where is the resistance to this coming from? Is it member states that are reluctant, or is it the
resistance comes from countries who think that sovereignty is more important than European policies? Maybe you recognize that a little bit here in the country. Exactly the same as you are facing here in your daily work. I think, and we're saying, excuse me, we give a permit for a residence to UK citizens. Well, that is only valid in my country, and if he goes to another country, he has to ask for a new permit. And we say, no way, there will be no deal if that is the position of member states. We think that as we will have, hopefully, if we can agree on the last details, a smooth system for the EU citizens in Britain. There has to be a smooth system for these UK citizens on the continent, and nobody, not the EU or the UK citizens, have to have a negative consequence of the Brexit decision. But I think we can achieve this, as I already indicated a few moments ago. There was a very negative statement or article about this in the first draft on the withdrawal agreement, but we succeeded to put it out of the text, and we're going to fight further. And we have said it very clearly, very openly to Mr. Barnier and to the Council. Don't come back to this. For us, UK citizens, one, they have a permit. There is onward mobility, has to be onward mobility inside the Union. And the other point that we're going to discuss a little bit more in detail, I think, in the hearing with the Home Affairs Select Committee, is about how our member states are preparing themselves for the registration of their UK residents for the period after Brexit. If this is also based on a smooth process without any administrative burden.
The article in the withdrawal agreement that's been removed, I think that was Article 32, wasn't it?
I have to ask. They say here behind me that's 32.
That's been struck out. And was that removed because of pressure from the European Parliament?
Yeah, together with UK government. Yeah. We work together with the UK government on this, and saying UK government had the same position as we.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, they are sitting around the negotiation table. We are also more accompanying this negotiation. But we have said from day one that this was, for us, not acceptable.
Okay. That's very helpful, and I think we're all grateful for what you've been saying about this. But you said there is resistance from some member states.
Well, yeah, you asked me how it is possible that some member states. Well, some member states are saying that's my business, so I give permits, and another state, a permit given there in Germany is not valid in Spain, and we all say, sorry, we live in the European Union, so let's make an agreement on this that. What is valid in one country is valid in the whole of the European Union. That's in my opinion, the philosophy behind the European Union. So, as a European Parliament, it's normal that we have this reaction.
I think we recognise. I'm interested to know which of the member states that are particularly.
I cannot give you there, so I should ask to the Brexit working group now, or colleagues of the Brexit working group, what is their latest thinking on that. But we're gonna, if you want, we can ask for that. So that we
certainly it would be interesting to think.
Well,
I think
we can do that. We can do
it. Can I just raise one final point? The question of the recognition of professional qualifications after Brexit. There's been some progress in the withdrawal agreement, but the Commission's view, I think, has been that most of that will need to be addressed in the context of the
future relationship.
Do you think that's something that ought to be in the political declaration, that there ought to be something substantial?
I think so. If we talk about a detailed political declaration, such crucial points will be there. Like, for example, we discussed a few moments ago the financial services and the idea of regulatory equivalence. I think also that are things that, or elements that I would prefer to see in the political declaration, That cannot be something that is hanging in the air for 3 years.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Howard Williams is next.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I'd like to ask you some of the details around settled status for European Union citizens in the UK, and particularly for vulnerable groups. So there have been some proposals such as digital support and a dedicated contact centre and that sort of thing, which I know you've been involved in. Are the measures that have been proposed sufficient, in your opinion, to meet the need that might arise?
Well, on vulnerable people and groups, so there are a lot of vulnerable people, because you can be vulnerable because you have no Android device, because the system will only work on Android devices. So if you have an iPhone, you're not lucky. You're on the bad side of. So you have people maybe who have difficulties really who have no access to internet. Third possibility, vulnerable people can say people who have difficulties to understand the whole process and or the language. Or they can have all the people who cannot, who need to have help in filling in this. So vulnerable people is not, in our opinion, one or other individual who have some difficulties. No, in this 3 million, what we are talking about of EU citizens, we think there are a lot of them. So we have said to the Home Office, and the Home Office is working on this. We want, next to the internet procedure, working on Android, we want, or people who don't have a biometric passport have also a problem to use that device. So we want really a network of contact points in Britain where these people can go. And a contact point that doesn't mean, there's one contact point in London and one contact point in Birmingham and one. That's not what we want. We want really a number of contact points where the people can easily go. Or if they cannot go because they are, for one or other physical reason, not capable to do so, that there is the Home Office comes at the home of these people to fill in these registration. We call it a registration for settled status. And they, until now, the latest news that we have, because I got yesterday with Mr. Javid a meeting also about this, is that they're going to work out the fastest as possible the system. And I've also said, make it public so that people see that you take this vulnerable categories seriously, that it is not something, for vulnerable people we will solve it. No, that is very concrete, and that you roll out this system of this network of contact points.
There's a specific group or subgroup. It's not a homogeneous group of 3 million, and that's the people who have language difficulties.
Exactly.
It's a particular interest of mine. Yeah. And I reckon there might be about 250,000 people who would encounter language difficulties potentially. Are you aware of any proposal that people could apply in one of the other official languages of the EU, other than English?
The idea would be that there are different languages used. Yeah.
Are you aware that we have a new system of social security being introduced called the new system of social security being introduced in the UK called Universal Credit, and the design of that in my part of the world, which is Wales, intended that it would be available bilingually, but the design is such that it can't cope with 2 languages, let alone 27, and that application through the medium of Welsh has had to be postponed because the system cannot cope.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah. Well, that's just a point of information that you might want to take up with the Home Affairs Committee this afternoon. There is a particular hard case, and hard cases make bad law, but a particular hard case in Wales where Welsh and English are official languages.
Yeah.
So, going into the detail of the matter, are you aware whether EU citizens living in Wales who can speak Welsh or wish to speak Welsh will be able to apply in Welsh or in English? Okay. The track record of not being very good, as I said, in terms of the social security system. I'll give you, for instance, if I may very quickly, the Chair, a former academic colleague of mine is from Denmark. She speaks Welsh, lives the life through the medium of Welsh, and sometimes speaks English. And I'm not sure how she will apply.
We're going to put the question to them.
I'd be glad if you would.
Yeah, I'm very sensitive for language questions. As you know, I'm Flemish and come from Belgium. So.
Can I then go on to just the situation of British citizens in the EU? Specific points. The European Parliament's resolution of the 14th of March proposes that the EU27 examine how to mitigate the loss of citizenship rights within the limits of EU primary law. What does that actually mean? What is mitigating the loss of citizenship rights? Well, what are you looking at?
Well, yeah, that is the EU citizenship. If you are a national of a member state of the European Union, automatically, based on our treaties, you receive EU citizenship. And EU citizenship has a number of advantages. And so, for example, consular aid. So if you're somewhere in South America, in the Amazon, for example, and you have a problem, then you can go to whatever your European nationality is, to a consulate of a European country, and they are obliged to help you. And that's consular aid, for example. Or you have the possibility also to participate in elections. So there are in total, I have now not the list, 4 specific rights attached to EU citizenship. So there is now the issue that if for the people going out of, normally they lose that EU citizenship. There is, in Northern Ireland, it's even more complicated actually, because there the people can continue to have an Irish passport. And by having an Irish passport, they retain their EU citizenship. And there is also the whole question, can you, once you got your EU citizenship, can you lose it? Because you lose it not by a decision that you personally have made, but by a collective decision of a country going out. So that's an open question, an open issue. I have launched quite a lot of time ago, I think at the beginning of the whole process, the idea to have the possibility for UK citizens to retain their EU citizenship on an individual basis. And I hope there was a court case, I don't know where this court case is, before the ECJ about the question, is that EU citizenship something that is a consequence of your national identity, or is that EU citizenship a citizenship that is individually linked to you as an EU citizen? And so if I don't know if this case for the European Court is for the moment, or but it would be interesting to know what the European Court thinks about this.
I mean, I have a particular interest in this, having led the debates on the matter in Parliament here a few weeks ago. And just to be clear, I mean, what you envisage as European citizenship would be extended to UK nationals living in the European Union. Is that what you're proposing?
No. It was about UK citizens in general.
And that would include the people who not only live in Northern Ireland, but of Irish extraction, who live in the UK.
In general, those who have EU citizenship now and normally should lose it because of at Brexit Day.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jeremy Lefroy.
Thank you very much, and I very much sympathise with Mr. Verhofstadt's last comment, and I would urge all parties to pursue that, especially if somebody's just renewed his passport, which extends to 2029 and says European Union at the top of it. I just wanted to ask one question coming out of the declaration or the statement of the 14th of March of the Parliament. And in paragraph 5, it talks about the shortcomings of the EU's relationship with Switzerland, which you've already referred to. Of course, Switzerland is a member of EFTA with a separate agreement from the EEA within EFTA. Is there any way in which an association agreement could be held between the UK and the EU within the context of membership of EFTA?
It's not. It's possible to have an association agreement and to make an EFTA type arrangement in the economic and trade bill. That's possible. So, because the association agreement, again, I repeat myself now, Mr. Ban, is not limiting the possibilities of whatever. You can, in the economic and trade pillar, do only a very small trade cooperation, or you can put in that put a single market if you want. So that the association agreement is neutral towards the intensity of your cooperation. But it tells you what you have to cover and how you have to, what governance you have to put on it, and how you have to manage it, and how do you have to ratify it, and how it can be applicable. That is the advantages of it. But it is neutral towards the question, we're going to limit ourselves to only trade in a few areas, or say, no, we go into an EFTA type, or an EA type, or a single market type of cooperation. There it's neutral. So that's the reason also why it is not a miracle. But it creates a framework that is, in my opinion, better suited for our negotiations than turning around principles and red lines.
So, just to be clear, there is no implicit contradiction between the UK at some future point becoming a member of EFTA and having an association agreement with the EU.
No, if you foresee that in your association agreement, there is no problem. No?
Because in the agreement it talks about the UK becoming a third country, and then in paragraph 4 it states a third country must not have the same rights and benefits as a member state of the EU or a member of EFTA or the EEA, or the EA, not and the EEA.
Yeah. Besides,
so that seems to me
if you agree that in your association agreement, in your trade part, you want an EEA solution, then you take an EEA solution. And then you can still, because apparently there's a toxic word, you use other words for it. So that's all. But that is independent from. So what you put in your trade and economic part, there you have full flexibility, and it's an association agreement doesn't limit you.
Fine. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Verhofstadt, for coming in. It is enormously courteous of you to come to the UK Parliament, and it's been easier to persuade you to come than some officials of Her Majesty's government. So thank you very much for being here. And my apologies for being late. I was asked to see the whips about some of today's business on the meaningful vote. I want to follow up on one of Mr. Wilson's questions on the Irish border, to get your view on what would happen in the event of no deal. If the UK did not put up a border, would the European Union require Ireland to put up a border?
Yeah, in the case of a no deal, then automatically there will be a border.
But the UK has made it clear it won't put up a border. But the UK has made it clear it won't put up a border. We'll have no physical infrastructure.
They have said in the beginning a small border.
But the EU...
There's a border, a small border.
But there's a border already. But the EU would, under those circumstances, put up a physical border. Is that correct?
But we want, in any way, to avoid it.
Yeah.
Our basic principle is we don't want it. That's also the reason why we want an agreement.
Yes.
And you prepare yourself always for the worst scenario, but that is not our thinking for the moment.
No.
And we want to avoid it in any circumstances. And so...
But are you
saying... but what are you going to do when this is happening and this is happening? That is not the way we are working in, because that should be a very bad starting point for the negotiations.
But that's exactly what's being done by the attempt to draw backstops. It's saying what will happen in
the
event.
Backstop.
The backstop. The whole point of a backstop is what happens in the event that things don't happen.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to establish is that in the event of no agreement, which is not impossible, and the UK does not put up a physical border, will the EU insist that Ireland puts up a physical border?
Well, automatically then there is a border. The question is that we prefer the backstop option in that case.
Okay.
Maybe you can, to avoid a border from your side, then accept the backstop option. That could be also...
No, we can avoid a border unilaterally. We can simply say we're not going to put up a physical border.
Yeah, okay, but you could
And then would the EU insist that the Republic of Ireland did?
No.
Because if you wouldn't, then the whole issue's gone away, because if you're not insisting on a hard border,
we're
not going to insist on a hard border. Who is the magical person insisting on a hard border?
Yeah, but there will be still not regulatory alignment, for example, between the north and south. So we will have to deal with that problem.
Yes, but
that's the reason why it is absolutely to avoid that we have no deal.
No,
that's to for you unilaterally and for us not only unilaterally, to avoid that we need to do something what we don't want to do.
But you would have a choice not to impose a physical border in the event.
No, we have no choice. The border is the.
Okay, so you would have no choice So why
the rules are the rules. We cannot change the rules. So, but we want to avoid that we have to apply that, and that is the reason why you have, Mrs. May, and in this interview has be in agreement with the backstop. So for us, if there is no, the backstop assures that we have no hard border to install, because the backstop avoid a hard border and makes that there is regulatory alignment and customs arrangements as they exist today between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic.
Thank you. What you said is extremely important. You said that the EU would insist on a hard border with no agreement because the rules are the rules. But the EU, when it suited it, has not always stuck to that position, has it?
Sorry?
Well, I seem to remember that the Maastricht Treaty has a no bailout clause for countries that get into trouble in the euro. But when it suited the European Union, the rules weren't the rules, were they? The rules were adjusted to meet the requirements of the time.
No, I should
so
not.
why are you so solid about the rules being rules?
I should not
now?
say that that we all the time change the rules. That's not true. The Stability Pact and Growth Pact rules are fully applied, but inside these rules there of the Stability and Growth Pact, there is a power, competence for the European Commission to say when they are launched. We have done it. We have launched procedures against member states, even big member states, based on the Growth and Stability Pact for excessive deficit procedure. It's not true that we don't apply the rules.
So the rules were fully applied, were they? So just remind me, what was Italy's debt to GDP ratio when it joined the euro with these fully applied rules? Did it meet the Maastricht criteria?
Too high, but they have been put also under procedures that were.
But it didn't meet the rules, did it?
No, sorry.
No. So the rules were flexed. So the rules are the rules when the EU wants them to be the rules, and therefore it's saying these will be the rules because we want to impose a hard border. But the rules could be flexed in this area because, as you said in one of your earlier answers,
the flexibility,
you represent a law-making body.
There is not the flexibility that has been used inside towards deficits and public debts towards countries of the Eurozone were possibilities that were foreseen in the rules of the Stability and Growth Pact. The Commission didn't go outside the rules of the Stability and Growth Pact. They have used the flexibility foreseen in the rules of the Stability and Growth Pact.
These were the rules to join in the first place, which were much clearer. The Stability and Growth Pact does have an ability not to fine countries, and as you will of course remember, when Germany broke the deficit level, its fine was remitted. So there is a flexibility in rules.
In the Stability and Growth Pact, there is a flexibility. And this flexibility has been extended now in the latest changes of the Stability and Growth Pact.
There was no flexibility in the no bailout clause. That was absolutely clear in the Maastricht Treaty.
Yeah, but
then it was done through something that was meant to be there for natural disaster.
Yeah, well, what is now your point, that we are too flexible in the Growth and Stability Pact in a currency union where you are not part of it?
No, my point is that you say to us that the rules are the rules and they must be applied, but I'm telling you that there is considerable evidence that the EU does not apply the rules when it's not in its interest to.
If you think that a country is not following the rules, or that the European Union is not following the rules, there is always the court. And you can go to court and say the European Union doesn't apply its own rules, and the European Union can be condemned to do so. That's a rule-based system. And that is exactly what we have in the Union. And the difficulty of this negotiation is a little bit the lack of recognition from one side that it is a rule-based system, that we cannot invent a relationship or partnership that go against these rules.
It's a rules-based system when it suits the European Union and amazingly flexible when it doesn't.
True. That's not true.
It's perfectly true.
I have a lot of criticism towards the European Union, but you cannot say, oh yeah, there's a system that adapts itself when it suits one or other big member state, I presume.
So did the Maastricht Treaty allow for bailouts?
The Maastricht Treaty said a lot of things, and this Maastricht Treaty, I can tell you, I lived it as a Prime Minister of Belgium, has obliged us to do, for example, the 60% I'm talking now about debt, to do enormous efforts. So it's rule-based.
It said no bailouts. and that was overridden. The point is very simple, that the EU makes rules, and it can make rules to suit circumstances if it chooses to. But by a voluntary decision, it is choosing to say that its rules are sacrosanct, when in other areas it's been much more flexible, and that this ought to be a part of a sensible negotiation rather than the EU simply saying, we will stick to rules which we haven't done in the past.
Now, we stick to a rule-based system, and we will not undo this rule-based system with an ECJ who has the oversight of all this. During this negotiation,
in this negotiation, but it's been done
in this negotiation, like in other negotiations, like in any negotiation that the European Union has with another country.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Can I know that John wants to come back on one point to do with something that was in the newspapers this morning. John.
Mr. Verhofstadt, you've been very generous with your time, but I just wanted to raise one small issue. It's to come back to the issue of security, because I think it's widely recognised that the British intelligence capability is probably the best in Europe. And you may have seen some remarks by the head of GCHQ, who stated that British intelligence has helped prevent 4 attacks on the continent of Europe in the past year. Now, surely it makes sense for everybody that we should just say that in this specific area, we will do nothing which will diminish intelligence sharing and cooperation. Indeed, we will continue to try and build it up. And just take that out of the negotiations and say it is so important to save people's lives that we should just agree that now.
Yeah, and I have yesterday in my intervention before the Fundamental Rights Agency indicated how it could work and how the sharing of information could on what it would be based. Because already today you are not in a number of corporations of internal security in the Union, but have indicated how it would work, how also this exchange of information can work in this new environment that we will creating. And that's just the whole. I will not repeat Mr. Bann. That's the reason why I have a copy here. And maybe, if I may ask you, if it could be spread
we'd be very happy
to all the members. But it gets in detail how we see European arrest warrant, how it will work. If that is not possible, what is the system that could be put in place? On the sharing of information, if there is no direct access to the database, for example, of Europol, how we can find a system where there can be, on a regular basis, an automatic exchange of information.
But you're still suggesting that somehow we should seek an arrangement which is going to be less comprehensive than the one we've got at the moment. Is it not just common sense that we should not have negotiations on this? We should just say intelligence sharing will continue as it does now.
Intelligence sharing will continue. You have to put that in a framework that is consistent. That is, from the beginning, I have a little bit. My feeling is why it is so difficult sometimes between Britain and the UK to talk about these things. Maybe you are very practical people. You'll say, okay, there's a problem, here's the solution. Oh, there's a new problem, here's the solution. We on the continent, we need a little bit of concept, saying, yeah, okay, what is the basis for it? What is the framework for it? And that is what exactly I have done yesterday. That is to find for every of these corporations a maximum of cooperation that is possible, so to avoid any disruption in the field of security. Because we don't want that. You don't want it, we don't want that. But we have to get it right, on the right basis, on the right in the right framework, and that is what I have done. Okay. But I give you.
We will read. If you leave it with us, we will circulate it to members of the committee. Can I ask one final question?
Yeah.
Which is, on this same point, you said a number of times this is not possible, and we have our rules and our framework. Can I take the example of bring you back to Galileo as a for instance? Because you said we have a regulation which the British helped to draft. What would Britain have to do? What would Britain have to say? What would Britain have to accept in order to continue to participate in the Galileo programme?
Well, they can continue to participate in the Galileo programme, and that within the rules that we have agreed on. It's not that they cannot participate.
So what would Britain have to say for that to happen? As a non-member state, what would Britain have to do?
They said what we want to, maximum possible, participate in the Galileo program, and we have said, yeah, that is possible within the rules that we that are applicable in Galileo and that have been approved by the UK. And what we are doing, what we are proposing as a participation of UK in the Galileo program is the maximum possible within the rules of Galileo.
That is precisely my question, Mr. Verhofstadt, because what I'm trying to get at, because you've referred obviously to the British red lines, I'm just exploring in this final question the European Union's red lines. And the answer you appear to be giving is we can agree a certain amount of cooperation, but no further because of the rules that we have at the moment. The question I'm trying to understand is, if Britain said, we're prepared to agree to this, this and this, could we continue to participate as we do now in the Galileo programme, including, linking to John's point, sharing information which we're told we won't be able to get once we've left because in some way Britain is a security risk?
The only way to do that is then to change the basic rules of the Galileo program.
But are you willing to do that if Britain says we're prepared to accept ECJ oversight?
I don't see for the moment any wish to open the regulation of the Galileo program.
So in the case of Galileo, it doesn't matter what Britain offered. It doesn't matter what
offered.
You're
saying we want in fact the status quo. That is what you want.
Well, ECJ jurisdiction, obviously continuing financial contribution, whatever. You're saying there's nothing that we could offer in the negotiations that would enable the regulation to be changed. Is that the position?
No, I'm saying that in the actual regulation, what we can do is the maximum. What we have said, what we have reacted is the maximum what is possible in the regulation. So then we need to change the regulation. That's what I'm saying.
But would you be
I
willing to change the regulation?
I am not in a position to say, oh yeah, there is a wish in the, or there is a possibility in the Union to change the regulation on the Galileo. I'm not in that position to tell you that now.
But would you have an objection in principle to changing it to allow continued participation as happens now?
In principle, I have nothing to wish about this. It's the regulation. You think, okay, put the question on the table. If the British side is saying, okay, we want even to open the regulation of Galileo now, as we are a member of the Union, you can do that. Put the proposal on the table. That's another way of thinking. But you cannot expect from me that I'm saying, yeah, and I think that the Union is willing to open the regulation on Galileo. I'm not in a position to tell you that.
Well, thank you very much. You have been wonderfully patient and generous with your time. As you can see, I think almost every member of the committee who was here today was keen to ask you questions.
Okay.
Which is why we have appreciated you coming along here today. And we wish you good luck this afternoon with the Home Affairs Committee. Order, order.